Howdy everyone. I'm getting close to installing the flap pieces parts into the fuselage, but before I do that, I wanted to remove this push-pull tube from the elevator linkage. So this tube is the one that connects, at one end it connects to the controls, and at the other end it connects to the bell crank that's roughly at the mid-fuselage position. I believe that's the 706 bulkhead where that bell crank is located. So what I had done was, in order to get this rod out, like I've talked about in another video, you have to take the rod ends off. And as I unscrewed the rod ends, I counted the turns so I could roughly get it back into place where it came from. And I also wanted to see roughly how many threads of engagement I had into that rod end. Now those particular rod ends, I think they have what's called witness holes in them. And when you have your assembly in place, ready for flight, you stick a piece of safety wire into that hole. And if you have enough thread engagement, obviously your safety wire will not go through. If you do not have enough thread engagement, your safety wire will go through that hole. And that's basically telling you that your tube is too short. I've not done that yet. I was mostly concerned about counting the turns and getting, when I put the rod ends back in, I want to make sure I put it in basically those same number of turns. I wanted to physically look at the thread engagement on each end. When I put this assembly back together and verify that it's back where it came from, so to speak, I'll check those witness holes. On some rod ends, you don't have that because they're male thread rod ends. They're not a female being threaded onto a stud. So those particular rod ends will not have any kind of a witness hole. So what could happen is if you have a lot of thread showing after your rod end is put on. So if your rod end is just barely on the stud, in a worst case scenario, there is a possibility, however, it's rare, but it is possible that the push-pull tube can unscrew itself from one of the two ends. So one way to prevent that is to use a spacer, and I've talked about these being used potentially on the aileron push-pull tubes. But for this tube, I have plenty of thread engagement. Again, I'll verify it with the witness hole, but I have plenty of thread engagement into the rod end, but I also have quite a few threads showing down here between the tube and the rod end. So what I've done is I've just made these spacers that will just sit in here like you see it. What that does is, if you can imagine, the rod end is locked in place. The tube would have to turn counterclockwise to unscrew itself from that rod end. So at the other rod end, again, the rod end is held securely in place. If the tube is turning counterclockwise to unscrew itself from that other end, that means it's screwing itself further into this rod end. So as that rod end turns, there's a potential that the jam nut can also turn and the tube will continue to screw itself in. To stop that, you use a spacer. Once it screws itself in and hits this spacer, it will stop rotating. You want that to happen before this rod end completely disengages. So that's the point of having these spacers. So as I said, I'm comfortable with the number of threads that this rod end screws into. When it's engaged and the length is correct for my mechanism, I'm happy with the threads that are engaged. I wasn't very happy with the number of threads still showing, and I was mildly concerned that it could be possible for the tube to unscrew itself from one of the two ends. So I put these spacers in, and I'll be verifying that when I get it back together using the witness hole and safety wire. And I plan on looking at the same thing for the ailerons. There's no witness hole on those rod ends. So you have to be very aware of thread engagement. If you're happy with thread engagement and it meets standards, then you can go ahead and use a spacer to ensure that the connecting rod cannot physically unscrew completely from one of the two ends. Okay, so let me get this back together, and then I believe I might be able to start putting the flap mechanism pieces parts back in and seeing how it looks. Howdy everyone. All right, we are back in the shop. So as you've probably noticed, a lot of back and forth between Site A and Site A1, which is the shop and the garage. Alrighty, so what you're looking at are a couple of different pieces. This you've seen before. This is the most forward center console area. This is basically right behind the firewall. This houses the fuel pump, and I incorporated a couple of cup holders, and I've incorporated some gizmos up here. This is where my fuel valve handle will be. I've talked about that before in another video. Here is the center cover that I have been working on. This is for the manual flap conversion. This is now complete, as you can see. I still have not riveted this reinforcement plate onto here, but I just wanted to show you where I am so far. So I'm very pleased with how this is turning out. Obviously, it gets beat up quite a bit. The all-clad aluminum gets beat up quite a bit when you're jacking with stuff for days on end. So, you know, with it being marred and scratched and things like that, it wasn't looking so hot. But now that I've got some paint on it, it looks great. I did not do a horrible job on the painting. This is actually by design. I used a hammered type of spray paint for the brown and for the black, so it's supposed to have that hammered look to it. It's almost like a fisheye look. I like that. I like that look, and this particular paint seems to be quite durable. I had painted the flap handle with POR 15, and this is very, very durable. This is almost like the powder coating that Vans gives you on their different weldments. This is of that type of quality. This hammered paint to me has the same feel and almost the same type of durability to it that this POR 15 does. Now that will be proven over time, but just the look of this paint and the way that it feels and the way that it went on reminded me a lot of this. So I think this might be quite durable. And I just like the look of it. I really like that textured look. So I like that appearance so much that I went ahead and did the same thing to this. I went ahead and painted this. I am not a fan of painting wood. I firmly believe that wood should be nothing more than stained or clear coated. But in this instance, I went ahead and painted, and it's fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. Some of the black got peeled off because I didn't wait for it to dry. You're supposed to wait like 48 hours for the paint to fully cure. And I had only waited like maybe 12, and then I put some tape on this so I can paint these areas, and the tape pulled the black off. No big deal. I'll touch that up with a brush. But anyway, so now these two match, and I do like that same look. That hammered look I think is really cool. So next step. So here's the deal. Like I've said, a lot of back and forth between here and the garage, and it's a lot of screwing around, and I've gotten to the point now where I want to get the plane out of the garage and bring it back in here into the shop. I'm tired of working on it out there. I've got other things I need to do in the garage, and I can't because the plane is in the way. So I really need to get that out of there. So anything that can be done here in the shop with the plane disassembled, I'm going to put that off until the plane comes back in here. So the only things I'm going to focus on from this point going forward are the things that have to be done while the plane is in the garage, while it's assembled. So I'm not going to work on flap stuff anymore for a little while. I'm going to set that aside because I believe everything from here on out with the flaps can be done here in the shop with the plane disassembled. So next thing I'm going to work on will be the and just show you a couple other flat parts here. I'm not going to talk about them. I'm going to work on the wing fairings because those have to be fitted while the wings are attached. And I'm also going to work on the fuel lines between the wings and the fuselage because obviously those need to be run while the wings are attached. And I believe that's it. I believe once those two tasks are complete, I can disassemble the plane, bring the fuselage and all of its pieces, parts back into the shop, and then I can tackle all of this other stuff in here. So a lot of jumping around yet again, and I apologize. I know sometimes these videos get kind of disjointed because I'm working on flaps, then the next video I'm working on skins, and then the next video I'm working on, who knows what. So, but such is the nature of experimental aircraft construction. All right. Thanks for hanging in there with me, guys. I appreciate it. And let me get some work done, and I'll talk to you soon.